The trading station orbited the neutral moon of Kepler 442c, a sprawling metal behemoth that housed dozens of alien species from across the galaxy. Commander Zexthul of the Vorthak Dominion stalked through the crowded corridors, his four arms swinging with predatory grace. Behind him, his squad of elite warriors moved in perfect formation, their chitinous armor gleaming under the artificial lights. The Vorthak had built their reputation on conquest and intimidation, standing nearly 3 meters tall with razor-sharp claws and mandibles that could crush steel. They were feared throughout known space. Their military prowess had brought hundreds of worlds under their control, and their very presence on the station made other species step aside in nervous deference. "Sir, we've located the human," reported Lieutenant Kraktar, his voice a low rumble through his translator device. "He's in Section 7, just as intelligence indicated." Zexthul's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. The human had been selling weapons technology to rebel groups across 3 sectors, undermining Vorthak expansion efforts. The Dominion's high command had finally grown tired of this interference and dispatched their best hunter-killer squad to eliminate the problem. They found their target exactly where expected, a small maintenance shop tucked between a Zolonian food vendor and a Rigelian crystal merchant. The human sat hunched over a workbench, completely absorbed in his task. He appeared utterly ordinary by human standards, average height, unremarkable build, wearing simple mechanics coveralls. His brown hair was streaked with premature gray, and his hands moved with the steady precision of someone who had spent decades working with delicate machinery. What struck Zexthul most was the human's complete silence. While other species in the station chattered, bargained, or called out to customers, this one worked without making a sound. Even when Vorthak warriors filled his doorway, casting long shadows across his workspace, the human didn't look up or acknowledge their presence. "You are Marcus Chen," Zexthul stated, his translated voice booming in the confined space. "By order of the Vorthak Dominion, you are under arrest for crimes against the state." The human's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work. He was assembling what appeared to be a standard power coupling, though Zexthul noticed the components were slightly modified in ways he couldn't immediately identify. "I said you're under arrest, human," Zexthul repeated, taking a step forward. His warriors spread out behind him, blocking any possible escape route. Marcus finally looked up, meeting the commander's multiple eyes with an expression of mild curiosity rather than fear. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational. "I heard you the first time." The casual dismissal sent a surge of anger through Zexthul. Lesser species cowered before Vorthak might, begged for mercy, or at least showed proper respect for their superiority. This human acted as if they were discussing the weather. "You will come with us immediately," Zexthul demanded, extending one clawed hand toward the human. "Any resistance will be met with lethal force." Marcus set down his tools with deliberate care, each movement precise and unhurried. "Resistance?" He tilted his head slightly, as if considering the word. "That's an interesting choice of terminology." Around the station, other vendors had begun to notice the commotion. A crowd of various alien species gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by curiosity, but kept back by fear of the Vorthak warriors. Whispered conversations rippled through the group as they recognized the infamous human who had been operating on the station for the past 3 years. The Zolonian food vendor, a kindly creature named Blip, who had often shared meals with Marcus during quiet periods, wrung his tentacles nervously. "Such a peaceful man," he murmured to a nearby Arcturian merchant. "Never raises his voice, never causes trouble. Why would the Vorthak want him?" The Arcturian, whose crystalline features reflected the corridor lights, shook his head sadly. "Humans are known for their unpredictability. Perhaps this one has been hiding his true nature." Back in the shop, Tension continued to build. Marcus stood slowly, his movements still careful and controlled. At his full height, he barely reached Zexthul's chest, making the size difference between them even more pronounced. The human's apparent calm in the face of overwhelming odds puzzled the Vorthak commander. "Your species' reputation for stubbornness precedes you," Zexthul said, his mandibles clicking with what might have been amusement. "But stubbornness will not save you from Vorthak justice. You have interfered with our expansion for the last time." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, as if accepting this assessment. "You know, Commander, I've been working on this station for 3 years now. In all that time, do you know how many complaints have been filed against me?" The question was so unexpected that Zexthul found himself momentarily off balance. "That is irrelevant to—" "Zero," Marcus continued, his voice still quiet and measured. "Not one complaint, not one incident report. The station administrator calls me a model citizen." He gestured around his small shop with one hand. "I fix things that are broken. I solve problems quietly and efficiently. I don't cause trouble." The human's words hung in the air like a challenge, though his tone remained conversational. Zexthul felt his irritation growing. This was taking too long, drawing too much attention. A simple arrest was becoming a public spectacle. "Enough of this!" the commander snarled. "Kraktar, restrain the prisoner!" As the lieutenant stepped forward, Marcus picked up the device he had been working on. It looked harmless enough, just another piece of standard machinery. But something in the way the human held it, in the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth, made Zexthul's combat instincts suddenly scream a warning. Lieutenant Kraktar moved forward with the confidence of a predator approaching helpless prey. His massive form filled the narrow space between the workbenches as he reached out to grab the human's shoulder. The crowd outside pressed closer, morbid fascination overcoming their fear as they anticipated watching the small human be crushed by Vorthak might. Marcus moved. The motion was so fluid, so economical, that most observers missed it entirely. One moment, Kraktar was reaching for him. The next, the Vorthak lieutenant was stumbling backward, clutching at his throat where a thin line of blue blood seeped between his armored plates. The device Marcus had been working on hummed softly in the human's hand, now recognizable as a precisely calibrated plasma cutter. "Impossible," Zexthul breathed, his combat computer struggling to process what had just occurred. Kraktar was a veteran of 50 campaigns, enhanced with the finest Vorthak military cybernetics. No creature should have been able to move faster than his augmented reflexes could track. Marcus examined the plasma cutter with the same methodical attention he had given his earlier work. 73% power coupling efficiency, he mused aloud, as if commenting on a technical specification rather than the fact that he had just wounded a Vorthak warrior. Not bad for a field modification. Kraktar's eyes were wide with shock as he applied pressure to his neck wound. The cut had been precise, slicing through exactly the right gap in his armor to draw blood without causing permanent damage. It was a warning, delivered with surgical precision. "Kill him!" Zexthul roared, his own shock giving way to rage. The remaining 3 warriors raised their pulse rifles, the distinctive whine of charging energy cells filling the small space. What happened next would be talked about in the trading station's cantinas for years to come. Marcus didn't duck, dodge, or seek cover. Instead, he stepped forward into the path of the weapons, moving with that same unsettling fluidity. His left hand shot out and touched something on the wall behind him, a standard maintenance panel that every shop on the station possessed. The panel's surface lit up with a complex pattern of lights that meant nothing to the Vorthak, but caused several other species in the crowd to gasp in recognition. The lights went out, not just in Marcus's shop, but throughout the entire section of the station. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in a dim red glow that turned the confrontation into something from a nightmare. In that crucial second of darkness and confusion, Marcus moved again. When the emergency lights stabilized, 2 more Vorthak warriors were down. One clutched a disabled weapon, its power cell somehow completely drained. The other stared in bewilderment at his pulse rifle, which had been partially disassembled so quickly that he hadn't realized it until he tried to fire. "Station security protocols are fascinating," Marcus said conversationally, still holding his modified plasma cutter. "Most species design their systems with multiple redundancies, fail-safes, and emergency overrides. Humans, we tend to think differently. We plan for the scenario where all the official channels fail and you need to solve the problem with whatever tools you have available." Zexthol found himself backing up, despite every instinct that screamed at him to attack. Something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. The human moved like a trained assassin, but spoke like an engineering professor. His actions were those of a combat veteran, but his demeanor remained that of a quiet mechanic, just trying to do his job. "What are you?" the commander demanded. Marcus tilted his head thoughtfully, the same gesture he had made earlier. "I told you already. I fix things that are broken." He gestured around the station with his free hand. "Sometimes the things that need fixing are more complicated than a power coupling or a navigation computer." The crowd outside had grown larger, drawn by the power fluctuation and the rumors spreading throughout the station. Among them, Blip the Zolonian vendor watched with a mixture of amazement and growing understanding. He remembered conversations with Marcus over shared meals, casual mentions of the human's past that had seemed unimportant at the time. "He told me once that he used to work in problem resolution," Blip whispered to the Arcturian merchant. "Said he traveled a lot for his job before he came here." The Arcturian's crystalline features flickered with realization. Problem resolution. On this many worlds. For 3 years he's been living here quietly, and we never thought to ask what kind of problems he used to solve. Back in the shop, Zexthul was reassessing everything he thought he knew about humans. Intelligence reports painted them as a young species, barely past their homeworld, relying on crude technology and brute force tactics. They were supposed to be loud, emotional, and predictable. This human was none of those things. "The rebellion weapons," Zexthul said slowly, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "You didn't just sell them technology, you taught them how to fight us." Marcus's expression didn't change. But something in his eyes seemed to confirm the commander's suspicion. "Knowledge is the most valuable commodity in the galaxy, Commander. The Vorthak have known that for centuries. You use fear and intimidation because they're effective tools. But there are others." The remaining warrior still standing, Sergeant Vexhul, shifted nervously from foot to foot. His training told him to charge, to overwhelm the enemy with superior firepower and numbers. But his survival instincts, honed through decades of combat, warned him that this particular enemy was far more dangerous than he appeared. "Sir," Vexhul said quietly to his commander, "perhaps we should call for backup." Zexthul's mandibles clicked with frustrated anger. Calling for backup would mean admitting that 4 elite Vorthak warriors couldn't handle a single human mechanic. The political implications alone would destroy his career, assuming he survived the next few minutes to have a career. "No," he growled. "We finish this here." Marcus nodded, as if he had expected this response. He set the plasma cutter down on his workbench with the same careful precision he had shown earlier, then began rolling up his sleeves. The motion revealed forearms marked with scars that definitely hadn't come from routine maintenance work. "I was hoping you'd say that," Marcus said quietly. "It's been a long time since I've had to solve this kind of problem." The small maintenance shop had become a tomb. Zexthul advanced slowly, his remaining functional warrior flanking him while the two wounded Vorthak struggled to regain their bearings. The commander's combat experience screamed warnings, but Vorthak pride demanded he finish what he had started. Marcus waited in the center of the shop, completely relaxed. His hands hung loose at his sides, and his breathing remained steady. To most observers, he looked like a man resigned to his fate. To Zexthul, who had spent decades reading body language across 100 different species, the human looked like a coiled spring waiting to be released. "Last chance, human," Zexthul declared, drawing his ceremonial war blade. The weapon had tasted the blood of champions from dozens of worlds, its edge sharp enough to cut through most known materials. "Surrender now, and your death will be quick." Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the confrontation began, the expression reached his eyes. "You know, Commander, I've been studying Vorthak military doctrine during my time on this station. Fascinating reading. Your species has an impressive track record of conquest." The human began to move, not toward the exit or any obvious weapon, but simply walking in a small circle around the workshop. His movements were casual, almost leisurely, but Zexthul noticed that each step placed Marcus in a slightly better tactical position. "Your strength lies in overwhelming force applied with precision," Marcus continued, his voice still conversational. "Superior numbers, superior firepower, superior individual physical capabilities. It's worked well for you across the galaxy." Sergeant Vexhul attempted to circle around behind the human, but Marcus adjusted his path just enough to keep both Vorthak in his line of sight, without seeming to pay attention to their positioning. "The thing is," Marcus said, pausing next to a shelf of spare parts, "humans developed our military strategies under different circumstances. We didn't have the luxury of being the biggest, strongest, or most numerous. We had to get creative." Zexthul lunged forward with blinding speed, his war blade seeking the human's heart. The strike should have ended the fight instantly. Vorthak reflexes were enhanced far beyond baseline biological norms, and Zexthul was considered fast even by Vorthak standards. The blade sliced through empty air. Marcus had moved not backward but forward and to the side, flowing around the attack like water around a stone. His left hand shot out and caught Zexthul's wrist, not to block the strike but to redirect it. The commander's own momentum carried him off balance as his weapon buried itself in the metal shelving. Before Zexthul could recover, Marcus's right hand struck 3 precise points along the Vorthak's armored torso. The strikes looked almost gentle, mere taps compared to the brutal force Vorthak were accustomed to in combat, but each one targeted a specific nerve cluster, exploiting anatomical knowledge that no human should have possessed. Zexthul's left arm went numb. His breathing became labored as his secondary respiratory system seized. Most critically, his balance centers were disrupted, leaving him swaying on his feet while his vision flickered between normal sight and combat-enhanced perception. Vexhul roared and charged, hoping to overwhelm the human through sheer mass and fury. Marcus sidestepped the attack almost negligently, then did something that made the watching crowd gasp in horror and amazement. He caught the Vorthak sergeant, not grabbed or tackled, but caught him mid-charge and redirected his momentum, using the warrior's own strength to send him crashing into a bank of equipment along the far wall. The impact shook the entire shop and left Vexhul stunned amid a shower of sparks and twisted metal. "Pressure points, leverage, timing," Marcus explained calmly, as if giving a lecture to engineering students. "When you understand how a system works, you can find ways to make it work for you instead of against you." Lieutenant Kraktar had finally stopped the bleeding from his neck wound and was struggling to his feet. His eyes burned with rage and humiliation as he drew a backup weapon, a simple but effective plasma pistol. "You cannot dodge energy bolts, human!" Marcus turned to face the wounded Vorthak, and for just a moment his expression grew cold. The change was subtle but unmistakable. like watching a friendly house cat remember it was descended from apex predators. No, Marcus agreed quietly, but I don't need to dodge them. The human reached into his coveralls and withdrew what appeared to be a simple multi-tool, the kind of basic equipment any maintenance worker might carry. But as Marcus's fingers moved across its surface, hidden panels slid open to reveal components that definitely weren't standard issue. Electromagnetic pulse generator, Marcus said, almost to himself. 60-meter range, tuned specifically for Vorthak military frequencies. I built it last week after studying the weapon signatures from your patrol ships. Kraktar fired his plasma pistol, but the weapon died in his hands before the bolt could fully form. Every piece of Vorthak military equipment in the shop, weapons, armor systems, communication devices, even their basic life support units, went dark simultaneously. The silence that followed was deafening. 4 of the Dominion's elite warriors stood helpless in an alien maintenance shop, stripped of every technological advantage that had made them masters of the galaxy. They were still physically formidable, but now they faced a human who had demonstrated intimate knowledge of their anatomy, psychology, and equipment. Zex Thul struggled to understand what had happened. His combat computer was offline. His enhanced reflexes dulled by nerve disruption, his communication link to the ship severed. For the first time in his military career, he felt genuinely afraid. "What are you?" he whispered. Marcus carefully returned the EMP device to his pocket, his movements once again taking on that methodical precision that had characterized everything he did. "I told you, Commander. I solve problems." The human walked over to where Zexathul struggled to remain standing and looked up at the towering alien warrior. Despite their size difference, there was no question about who held the power in the room. "The problem with your expansion into Sector 7 wasn't the rebels," Marcus continued softly. "It wasn't their technology or their tactics or their determination. The problem was that someone was teaching them to think like humans instead of like prey." Understanding dawned in Zexthul's eyes, along with a terror that had nothing to do with physical threat and everything to do with the implications of what the human was telling him. "You," the commander breathed. "You've been preparing them. All of them." Marcus nodded slowly. 17 worlds, Commander. 17 different species. Each one learning that the Vorthak can be beaten if you understand their weaknesses. And now they're teaching others. The crowd outside had grown silent, sensing that something momentous was happening. Word was spreading throughout the station that the quiet human mechanic had single-handedly defeated a Vorthak strike team. But those who had lived on the station longest, who had watched Marcus work and talked with him during quiet moments, were beginning to understand that they had been living alongside something far more significant than a simple repairman. "The rebellion will never stop now," Zexthul realized, his voice hollow with defeat. "It will spread. They'll share what you taught them." Marcus picked up his plasma cutter and examined it one final time before setting it aside. "Knowledge has a way of doing that, Commander. Once it exists, it wants to be shared." The aftermath came swiftly and quietly, much like everything else Marcus Chen did. Station security arrived within minutes, their mixed-species team moving cautiously through the crowd that had gathered outside the maintenance shop. What they found inside defied immediate explanation. 4 elite Vorthak warriors, alive but thoroughly defeated, sitting in stunned silence, while a human mechanic calmly organized his tools. "No charges will be filed," Marcus informed Security Chief Vaxari, a pragmatic Centaurian who had run the station's peacekeeping operations for over a decade. "This was a misunderstanding that has been resolved." Zexthul looked up from where he sat slumped against a damaged workbench, his pride as shattered as his confidence. The human was giving him an out, a chance to leave without admitting to his superiors that he had failed so completely. The gesture was almost more humiliating than outright defeat would have been. "Commander," Vaxari said carefully, addressing Zexthul with the formal courtesy due to a representative of a major galactic power, "do you wish to file a complaint about your treatment?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the shop understood the implications. If Zexthul filed an official complaint, he would have to explain how 4 Vorthak warriors had been defeated by a single human civilian. If he didn't, he would have to accept that the incident had never officially occurred. "No complaint," Zexthul said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Within an hour, the Vorthak had departed the station. No fanfare, no threats, no promises of return. They simply left, their sleek warship accelerating away from the trading post with unusual haste. Throughout the station, various species watched them go with emotions ranging from confusion to dawning hope. Marcus returned to his work as if nothing had happened. He repaired a navigation computer for a Rigelian trader, fixed a malfunctioning atmosphere recycler for the station administration, and shared a quiet meal with Blip at the Zalonians' food stall. To casual observers, it seemed like just another ordinary day, but beneath the surface, changes were already spreading. The story of the confrontation spread through the station's communication networks, then beyond to trade routes and shipping lanes across multiple sectors. Each telling added new details, some accurate, others embellished, but all carrying the same essential message: the Vorthak could be defeated. In a cantina on Proxima Station, a Delphinian merchant shared the story with a group of Andromedan refugees from one of the worlds the Vorthak had recently conquered. In a supply depot on the edge of Vorthak space, a human freighter captain quietly passed along technical specifications for certain types of electromagnetic pulse devices. On 17 different worlds across 3 sectors, species that had been learning new ways to resist oppression suddenly found their courage reinforced by the knowledge that even Vorthak elite forces were not invincible. 3 days after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Ambassador Thekmora of the Galactic Council arrived without ceremony, her elderly features marked by the kind of wisdom that came from centuries of navigating interspecies politics. She found Marcus in his workshop, naturally, working on what appeared to be a standard communications array, but which her experienced eye recognized as something far more sophisticated. "Mr. Chen," she said, settling her considerable bulk into the shop's only chair. "We need to talk." Marcus didn't look up from his work, but his hands paused for just a moment. "Ambassador, I was wondering when someone like you would show up." "Were you really?" Thekmora asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Or did you plan for this conversation as thoroughly as you planned everything else?" That earned her a slight smile from the human. "Planning is just applied imagination, Ambassador. You imagine all the things that could go wrong, then figure out how to prevent them." The ambassador studied Marcus with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "The Council has been monitoring Vorthak expansion for decades. We've watched them conquer system after system, species after species. Our analysts calculated that their momentum was essentially unstoppable." "Your analysts were thinking like diplomats," Marcus replied, finally looking up from his work. "Diplomats assume that everyone wants to negotiate, that there's always a political solution. Sometimes the problem isn't political." "And sometimes," Thekmora said quietly, "the solution requires someone willing to operate outside normal diplomatic channels." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "The Council knows about the 17 worlds." It wasn't a question, and the ambassador didn't treat it like one. "We know about the training programs, the technology transfers, the strategic planning sessions. We know that rebel forces across 3 sectors have suddenly become remarkably well coordinated and effective. Are you here to ask me to stop?" Thekmora considered the question seriously. As a representative of the Galactic Council, She should probably discourage any activities that might destabilize the current balance of power. As someone who had watched helpless species beg for protection that the Council couldn't provide, her feelings were more complicated. "I'm here to ask you to be careful," she said finally. "The Vorthak won't ignore what happened here. They'll investigate, they'll adapt, they'll find new approaches." Marcus returned to his work, his hands moving with that same steady precision that had impressed observers for 3 years. "Then I'll have to adapt faster." The ambassador rose to leave, but paused at the shop's entrance. "Mr. Chen, may I ask you something? After everything you've accomplished, after all the worlds you've helped, why do you stay here? Why continue this quiet pretense of being a simple mechanic?" Marcus was silent for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused entirely on the device in his hands. When he finally answered, his voice carried a weight that made the ambassador remember why humans had earned such a dangerous reputation in such a short time. "Because someone has to fix what's broken, Ambassador, and there's still a lot of work to do." As Thekmora left the station, she found herself thinking about the implications of what she had witnessed. The Galactic Council had spent centuries trying to maintain balance through negotiation and compromise, accepting that some injustices were inevitable in the name of stability. But now there was another approach spreading through the galaxy, the human approach. Fix what's broken, solve the problem, find a way, even when conventional wisdom said there wasn't one. Marcus Chen continued his work, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the trading station and the comfortable routine of his chosen cover identity. But across the galaxy, on 17 worlds and counting, other species were learning that the universe's bullies could be stopped. They were learning to think like humans. They were learning that sometimes the quietest person in the room was also the most dangerous. And in the depths of space, Vorthak expansion slowed for the first time in 3 centuries, as the Dominion's military planners struggled to understand how their perfect conquest machine had begun to break down. They would eventually trace the problem back to a small trading station and a quiet human mechanic. By then, it would be far too late to stop what he had started.